Well, I just submitted an article, as some of you know, on the molecular foundations of memory. And I got the review back. It was rejected. And I tell my students, hey, you have to have a thick skin if you're going to be in psychology or in the sciences. Or in academia, you just have to have a thick skin. So I'm limited on the whole thing, biological foundations of memory, to 3,000 words. And so one of the reviewers said, you cannot be ethical and do the evolution of memory without a thorough discussion of the evolution of the vertebrate nervous system. I'm going to do that in 3,000 words. So I've been asked to talk about sleep, dreams, dream interpretation, physiological bases, cultural and historical significance of dreams, psychological interpretation of dreams, and then finally how we might do dream interpretation in 35 minutes. So I've got to talk really fast. Cello, get on to it. Oh my God, 45 minutes, be still my heart. So, here's what I'm thinking. Most of you, like even, are not here to hear the physiological bases of sleep, and neither are you, right? I can tell by your head going, no, unless that was the Indian yes. Anyway, you're here to hear about dreams and how to interpret dreams, more than likely. Let's just talk about a little bit of the physiological part of dreams, and that would be that if you wake somebody up at night and you say, are you dreaming? Mostly through the night they will say yes. But mostly they'll say, I was thinking, I had a thought. More often than not, 50% of the time, okay? Except the first about half hour. And in the first half hour, if you wake somebody up, especially if they go right to sleep and they're snoring, they're going in slow wave sleep, and it takes forever to wake them up. And if you've ever been waken up in slow wave sleep in that first half hour, it takes you a while to remember not just where you are, but who you are. You know, they wake you up and you go, where am I? Who am I? So, and that maybe give a basis to some Chinese beliefs that the soul wanders when we're sleeping. And that's why don't suddenly wake somebody up, because their soul will be caught outside their body, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, but when you wait physiologically, and you wait till you see their eyeballs moving inside their eyelids like this, and that'll be the last third of the night. It's going to be REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. When you wake somebody up during that part of the sleep, they will invariably say, I was dreaming. Not I was thinking, I was dreaming. And they'll tell you vividly what the dream was. I did my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation both in a sleep lab. Two different projects. One is, can you learn during sleep? And the other one was, do the different sleep stages, like slow wave sleep and REM sleep, have any effect on visual and non-visual memory? So I spent about 5 years in a sleep lab. It was sponsored by NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, because they wanted to know if an astronaut's sleep could be modified. So anyway, I had a friend, and we would, I'd do experiments on my friends. And so I wired him up with the EEG, and he says, I never dream. I'm the only human being who doesn't dream. And his wife said, no, he really doesn't. He never reports a dream. So I said, okay, John, let's try it. So I wired him up in the EEG. I put him in this cold, nice bed with a big blanket locked in, where our EEG lab. I plugged him in the wall, ran to my machine, turned on the machine, and I watched his brain waves, for a couple hours. And then I waited, and I saw his eyeballs on the machine, because you put the electrodes like here, and you can pick up eye movement. It doesn't pick up brain waves. It picks up the muscle movement of the eye. And so I saw him going like this. So I went in quietly. I said, John. And he just went like this. And I said, what? And he goes, I was dreaming. He just wasn't used to being woken up in REM sleep. And whatever dream image he had, it was immediately forgotten. By the way, if you want to remember your dreams better, you should do just that. Have this beside your bed and put dream diary. And then put it beside your bed, and you wouldn't believe what a powerful stimulus that is. Because if you don't remember your dreams, trust me, you'll start remembering them just from that priming image. And I've done the same thing myself. I put it beside the bed, and I even look at it going, ooh, there's pressure here. I need to record my dreams. Also, if you want to remember your dreams better, record them before you get out of bed. If you get out of bed to go to the toilet or something, boop, they're often very quickly gone. So record it as soon. I also had I was doing a dream therapy workshop, and this woman said, I've never, 40 years old, never had a dream in my life that I remembered. So I said, put the notebook beside your bed, put dream diary on it, put a pencil right there. The whole class couldn't wait till the next day because she was adamant, never had a dream. She came in and said, well, it didn't work. And I said, did you put a book beside your bed with a pencil? And she goes, no, I knew it wouldn't work. And I said, humor me. Put it beside your bed. It's a strong stimulus. She came in the next day, very sheepish, and she said, ooh, I wrote down 2 words, and it's my handwriting, so I must have done it. And the 2 words were gone fishing. And in America, it's like a shortcut to say, I'm out of the office. You know, so you'll put gone fishing, meaning you're away or out of station, we say here. Anyway, so it does work if you want to remember your dreams. So starting about a couple hours into your sleep, you'll have like a 10-minute episode of this REM sleep. And you'll have about 10 maybe episodes, maybe up to 2 hours. At the end of your sleep period, total REM sleep, dream sleep, vivid dream sleep. And it is a bit physiologically like a storm. Because if you monitor heart rate, you'll see the heart rate go up and down, up and down. Blood pressure up and down, all during REM. So it's not like physiologically necessarily restful. It's like this physiological storm. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Have you ever gone like studying? Well, some of you study, but you study, you know, and you stay up and you only get 5 hours sleep, 5 hours sleep, 5 hours sleep. Finally, on Saturday night, you go to sleep and you sleep late on Sunday morning, right? And have you ever noticed that you just keep falling back into a dream? So that's what happens. As the longer you stay in bed, the more REM sleep you'll get. Now that's interesting too, because if you're used to about 8 hours and you go off and you go to your first class, like let's say at 8 a.m., you got 8 hours. But you come back and you say, I need a little nap before I stay up all the rest of the day. In the morning, your naps will be REM sleep. In the afternoon, your naps will be slow wave sleep, usually without any dreaming. So that's the physiological basis for REM sleep. Is slow wave sleep, deep sleep, dreamless usually. And we know almost all mammals have REM sleep. Reptiles have very little. Birds have some, but mostly it's a mammalian thing, and we think it may have something to do because mammals, 200 million years ago when they started evolving, were mammals, and we evolved from their line. They had a much larger cortex and larger top of the brain. And so we call it even the neocortex because of these mammals. And so we think REM has something to do with that bigger brain. Now, the psychological theories. One of the first major psychological theories was this Sigmund Freud, interpretation of dreams. He published the book in 1899, but they didn't want to make it look outdated. So they dated the book 1900. So it really came out a year earlier. But anyway, he laid out all of his psychological theory and hardly revised it in the next 39 years that he lived. So if you want to read a book, and a really well-translated book, because he wrote very clearly in German, and it translates very well in English. I'm going to talk about Carl Jung. You've heard of Carl Jung? How many people have heard of Carl Jung? You can read Carl Jung, like Memory, Dreams, and Reflections, and he's one of those guys where you read it, and you turn the page, and then you go, okay, my mind wandered. Where's the last time I actually understood a sentence? And you go back a page trying to figure out, man, that guy, he was a tough reader. Now, he did have a book that I recommend, because at the end of his life, about 1960, the BBC came to him and said, listen, you're like famous among all psychologists and psychiatrists. And why don't you do a book that people could read? I don't think they said it that way to him. Everybody could read, the common people, lay people. And he said, nope, and don't come back, I never changed my mind. So Carl Jung, that night, had a dream. And he was in like a street, and he was on like a soapbox, and he was just talking to the laborers, the common people on the street, about dreams and sleep. And they understood him. He called the BBC within that week and said, I changed my mind. And the guy said, you never change your mind. And he said, I changed my mind. I had a dream, and I like to follow what my dreams tell me. So he wrote a book called Man and His Symbols, and that's the one I recommend, published about 1960, 1962, because he wrote it to be clear. Now, what happened was, he said, I'll do it under this condition. All of my favorite people in the world, favorite writers and favorite dream interpreters, will each write a chapter. And I'll write the introductory chapter, and then I'll edit the whole thing. He wrote his chapter and died. So his best friend took the other chapters, edited the whole thing. But we have Jung's own words very clear in Man and His Symbols. Of course, now it'll be people and their symbols, but I think he meant men and women. Anyway, so Freud does interpretation of dreams. And Freud says, okay, when we have a dream, there's going to be two operations that are going on in the dream. One of them is we're going to take unconscious issues in the id. And he says, like we're 90% id, all unconscious. The reason you do things is always from the unconscious, solving unconscious early childhood issues. And the ego, which is consciousness, has to interpret what you're doing. And frequently they'll say, well, why are you doing this? And the ego will give a rationalization, a good reason, but not the real reason. So people say, well, Freud's theory was kind of negative. In a way it is, kind of pessimistic, because the id is always full of these dark, hidden impulses, usually aggressive, usually sexual. And so what he said is that when you ask people things, you can't really trust what they say because the ego is always filtering it. So how can we get at what people really thinking? What are their true issues? What are they really thinking and feeling deeply? And he said, one is dreams. Now the problem with dreams is the issue gets symbolized or switched. And so what you have to do is interpret this transformation from the unconscious to this conscious symbol, and then you can interpret what the unconscious issue is for the person. He also said that the dream also will take usually like two different issues and condense them into one dream theme. So one dream theme could have many issues, at least one or two, and usually more. And the other thing is that the issues will get transformed or symbolized, so it will not always reflect directly what you're unconsciously thinking. So you have to kind of work through the symbolization. And he said, and you have to be, this is interesting, in interpretation of dreams, he says, and you cannot always trust symbols. There's no kind of glossary of symbols. You can't just look up a symbol and then decide what the unconscious issue is. As soon as you turn that page, the next chapter is chimneys as penises. So he like contradicts himself immediately, interpreting any kind of smokestack as some sort of phallic symbol. So Freud would have you come into therapy. He was also interested in slips of the tongue, because he said sometimes you'll accidentally say things that you're unconsciously thinking, and you can watch for slips of the tongue. And the other one was accidents. So he has this famous quote of saying, there are no accidents. So, for example, somebody's, let's just take one, going down the stairs here, and you don't see the dog rail, you know, the dog grate, and you step into it, and you fall down. And people will always say, he had an accident, right? But Freud would say, okay, it's really easy to say, oh, it's an accident, oh, it's an accident. But let's examine the unconscious possibilities. So why would somebody run into that grating and fall and break their leg? Let's not take India, for example. Let's take America if you did that. What could you do? What invariably happens? You get attention. Well, you get attention here, won't you? People go, oh, poor baby. Maybe you're feeling unloved, you know, and now you get to limp around and people will help you and they'll get food for you. You can just sit there and be like a little Raja, you know, a Maharani, you know, and people bring you food and you're like, oh, I had an accident. What else can you do in America that's really tough to do in India? What even? Liability? Yeah, a lawsuit. A lawsuit. Immediately somebody falls in America and they go, a lawyer. You want an ambulance? No, I want an attorney. They sue all the time, which I thought was horribly unfair. Because I heard lawyers get, if it doesn't go to trial, the lawyer gets 1/3 of the amount. If it goes to trial and the lawyer has to actually do some work, the lawyer gets half. How fair is that? Until I married an attorney. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it is fair. It may change my mind a little bit. Anyway, yeah, so here's an accident. We normally just go accident. It could be attention. It could be you're going to make the school liable, you know, and they'll say, oh, well, you know, here, can we help you out here with your grades or anything? You never know, unconsciously. And what Freud would say is, and most Freudians, I think, would be, it's really easy to say, it's an accident. Let's examine it. But the best way was, for Freud, to get at unconscious business, use dreams. And notice, too, I had a colleague at the University of Colorado, and she was a PhD in organizational psychology. She was there 3 years on our faculty, and nobody knew if she was married. She did not talk about herself. She did not party with anybody. She wouldn't do anything, so just did her business, taught well, did her research, and left. So, you know, everybody's saying, man, she's a tough nut, you know, to crack. So I'm in the hallway one day, and she comes up, and she goes, hi. And I'm like, whoa, she said hello. And she said, I had this dream that there was this Vietnamese frog without any legs on a cart. And I thought, that is beautiful. Here's a person that won't reveal one word about themselves, but they'll tell me something as intimate as a dream. And also, you know, a bit naive, because psychologists are going, ooh, I wonder what that could mean. Ooh, I wonder what that could mean. And so that's Freudian dream interpretation, is you're going to use it to get at unconscious business. He also had the feeling that even if you're fighting now with a spouse, you're in your 30s or 40s, and you're fighting, that the roots of your fight are in your childhood. So that's why Freudian psychotherapy or Freudian psychoanalysis is always, let's go back to see how you solved all those early challenges, because they feel like problems now may have been you laid down a bad foundation, mostly dealing with your parents and the way they parented you, so that your personality is probably pretty much firmly set by 7 years old. So, and here's another nice thing about dreams is you can come to somebody and say, they come into therapy, and you say, well, tell me what's bothering you. Sometimes they don't want to tell you. Sometimes they have resistance, right? You say, tell me what's on your mind. The last thing they'll do is tell you what's on their mind. They don't want to share that. They're embarrassed. They haven't established rapport. But you can say, tell me a dream. Oh, well, there's this Vietnamese frog on no legs, and he's, they'll share the most intimate dream. And I'll show you how today, how you can use that material for psychotherapy. In 2 minutes, you can generate material for psychotherapy. And you can ask the person, do you think it could mean this? Or what do you think it could mean? And if they say no, you let it go. Now, any Freudian would say, after they suggested what it could mean, any Freudian would go, I know I'm right. They're just resisting the truth. Most non-psychoanalytic people will say, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. That's why they go into psychotherapy, because they're pretty certain they know what's going on most of the time. Okay, so Carl Jung, he wanted to come study with Sigmund Freud. He was an MD also, brilliant in his own right. When they say a student of Freud, he had an MD degree already. They started writing letters, and Freud immediately said, I think you're going to be my crown prince of psychoanalysis and dream analysis. Now, that Freud chose Carl Jung to be his crown prince, what did Freud think of himself? King, right? King. So they got invited to come to Clark College. I don't know, they were having their 50th anniversary like in 1909 or something. So Freud and Jung got on a boat together, and they were going across the ocean, and they said to New York, and they said, hey, let's interpret each other's dream. So Freud said, you go first. So Jung said, okay. And he said, I was with a group of people, and we were hunting a man, and his name was something like Sigfreuder. And Freud immediately goes, you want to kill me? And Jung said, no. That had nothing to do with it, except the name was really close to Sigmund Freud that he chose. But you can already see kind of a tense battle going on between the two geniuses, because, Freud's thinking this guy's going to take over. Plus, Jung had his own ideas. He was brilliant in his own right. Freud was a flaming atheist. And Jung said, look, I get all these themes, cross-cultural themes. He called them archetypes from all over the world. And everybody's got a God archetype. Everybody's got a mother archetype. It must reflect some ancient history. In fact, Jung said brains are like 1,000,000-year-old museums with influences when we were not human, a time before we were human. And that spirit stays within us. And it's a major part, the dark part of our personality. He called it the shadow. And he said, the shadow, though, it's a major part of our personality, but the shadow the positive side of the shadow is it can be creative. And I think the one I love, I keep citing it as art, is Picasso went up to a bicycle and took the handlebars off. And he took the seat off. And he said, El Toro, the bull. And I think you could buy the El Toro, the bull, for like $200 million if they'd part with it. But notice what he did. The creative side of his shadow took apart something that existed and put it together and made something very creative and interesting. So Jung liked dreams also. And he said, but he was a lot more flexible. He really said, there's no glossary of meaning. If you dream, of a smokestack, or somebody else dreams of a key and you dream of a lot, it has absolutely personalized meaning. And Jung even wrote, he said, every time I have a dream image, I say to myself, I have no idea what this could mean. Now let's investigate. He was much more flexible. And he was less rule-oriented than Freud about dream interpretation. So a patient came in and said, oh, by the way, he mostly only worked with rich people. And they would pay him a lot, so he didn't have to have a lot of patients. total. But they would come in, and one patient said, and they're all expecting to have their dreams analyzed by Jung. And she said, I can't sleep. And he said, close your eyes. And he said, lullaby, lullaby. And he sang to her till she fell asleep. So he was really experimental in his therapy, much more flexible than Sigmund Freud. At the same time, yeah.
Basically went back to what you said, Freud's original point, which is that symbols have personalized meanings, and then he contradicted himself immediately after.
Yeah. But Perls was more flexible on this. But the same thing, the idea that it could mean anything, it could be highly personalized, and you're going to project yourself, and you can't help it. Do you know the Kiki Booba? Do you know Kiki Booba? Do you know Kiki Booba, Gary? Okay, so I've got two naive experimental subjects. I'm sorry, participants, we call them now. This is A, this is B. Each decide now in your own head. Force out the thoughts that say kill Coolidge. Which one's Kiki and which one's Booba? Evan? Even? Do you agree? Isn't that crazy? Kiki is the one on the left. No, but you can go to the Andaman Islands where they don't even have whiteboards. And they'll say, Kiki's on the left, Booba's on the right. You can't help but project. In fact, if I said one is on parole for murder, you'd choose Kiki, which has got to be the silliest demonstration in the whole world. All I did was draw on a backward. Those things aren't alive. On parole for murder? Makes no sense. But we can't help. The point is, you can't help but project yourself onto those images. So they started fighting because Freud was so negative about the id, and Jung was saying, look, there's wonderful things in the unconscious. It's a bit like having a wolf for a pet. They don't make wonderful pets. It's a little dangerous. But at the same time, there's wonderful images there. We have feminine images of our own feminine self. We have masculine images of our own masculine selves. We have roles that we play, images, and you can get too invested, Carl Jung said, in your persona, right? I once went to play tennis down at this country club that I inherited the membership, and I went down to the country club to play tennis, and this guy comes up, and he goes, hi, I'm Dr. Cohen. We're going to play tennis, and he's Dr. Cohen. I said, hi, I'm Dr. Coolidge. And I proceeded to beat him 6-love, 6-1. I refused to give him a game in that first set. Of course, I hurt myself running around so much. But what a persona. You know, is this guy invested in being a doctor? Yes. Is that dangerous for him, his family, his whole emotional state? Yes. So, Jung said we can examine all these archetypes, even in a single dream. And they both admitted, Freud and Jung, that you can't help but project yourself and your issues on those things. And then finally, Jung saying all these archetypes for gods and saints and some holy stuff, and Freud saying there is no God. That was it. And then it was like by 1909 or 1912, they stopped talking to each other. Freud lived 27 more years, and they never talked to each other again. So here are the two most intimate buddies in the world. And anytime they met a mutual friend, Sigmund would say, how is Carl doing? And Carl would say, how is Sigmund doing? But they'd never talked again. In fact, it nearly drove Carl Jung crazy. You remember that story? He went to his lakeside house, and he would build little huts with rocks. And everybody thought, Daddy, my husband, he's going nuts. This breakup with Freud is killing him. But Man and His Symbols, great book by Jung. Interpretation of Dreams, the book I recommend for Freud if you want to do more about dream interpretation. And then finally, we have Fritz Perls. Now, Fritz Perls was a really cool guy. He was, and when I say really cool, I mean like California cool back in the 60s. He looked like Santa Claus. But he was into creative frustration. And he also said, like, if you say to somebody, he was really afraid of language because he thought language is just types of baloney. I define baloney for my class. It's this meat that we don't know what's in it, and it usually means not true. Baloney, not true. Okay, so Fritz Perls was worried that people are so used to pat phrases, automatic phrases, cliches, that you'll never get the truth out of them. So you can try this too. If you say, "Hi, how are you?" Well, let's try that. Gary, will you humor me and say, "Hi, Fred, how are you?"
Hi, Fred. How are you?
Oh, God, I'm glad you asked. I have had this blister on my foot for the last week, killing me. Look at it. See, it's red and it hurts. Woo, foot's stinky too. Will you ever ask me how I am again? Yeah. See, he's sorry. He asked me how I am. What did he want to hear? Baloney. He wanted to hear baloney. He wanted to hear, "Oh, I'm fine, My dog just died. My wife left me, The house burned down." You don't want to hear that. "Fine, how are you?" And then I say back, "Oh, fine, how are you?" And he's thinking, well, the wife just left me. The house burned down. We don't want, so Perls said, you can't trust language. But what can you trust? A dream. You can trust when that woman said, "I saw a green Vietnamese frog without legs on a cart." You can trust that was the truth, even if she wouldn't tell anybody the truth. Agreed? D'accord? D'accord. So what he said was, here's what we'll do. He had like a hot seat. And he got so famous at the end. Oh, by the way, he said, like if you say, "Hello, how are you?" That's like chicken poop because it's little, okay? And then you had like horse poop, and that's kind of bigger. So chicken poop is like, "Hello, how are you?" And just all these automatic phrases where we really don't want to hear truth. And then horse poop is like, "Well, why did you do that?" And you say, "Oh, I did it because." And he said, all you'll get is a rationalization. You won't get the truth. And then he said, finally, if you get as famous as I am, Fritz Perls, then you'll have elephant poop, and you can write a book on therapy, and that's the biggest poop of all. He said, what can you trust? You can't trust language. The only thing you can trust is a dream. And he'd have people sit down in front of 600 people when he got really famous, and he'd say, "Okay, tell us your dream." And he would cut them off, like right away, and just say, "Okay, become that dream part." And let's take the Vietnamese frog. If you were a Vietnamese frog without legs and green on a cart, what would you say to yourself? Can you think of, you don't have to say it out loud. I know some of you are frightened, but I won't call on you, except for even. What would you say if you were a green frog on a cart? Listen, you can't help but project yourself onto that image. Now, it's a little harder because that wasn't your dream image, but imagine if it was your dream image, how much easier it would be. And then he dealt with that and said, okay, what he believed was that people have like a hierarchy of unfinished business. And so that would be like this, I had a friend, he said, would you be my fourth best man at my wedding? And I said, well, you mean you have 3 other guys and I'm fourth? And he said, no, I've been married 3 times. I want you to be my best man for the 4th time. And he had 2 best friends at that time. This is a nice story. And the other best friend got his feelings hurt because he wasn't chosen as the fourth best man. But that marriage only lasted a year. And then for his fifth best man, he asked his other friend. So it worked out fine. But this friend kept marrying older women. And older women. And then he would get dissatisfied. But unlike a lot of American men, he kept marrying older women. And they kept getting older because he was getting older. But he was getting very dissatisfied. So talking to him, he says, oh yeah, my mom died when I was 12. And, and I heard this and I thought, isn't that like a tragic issue that's tough to solve ever? Your mom leaves you and you're only 12 years old. So I suspect, this is Fritz Perls, P-E-R-L-S. And the book I recommend for this one is Gestalt Therapy Verbatim. That's one of his best books. So those are the three big books: Interpretation of Dreams, Man and His Symbols, and Gestalt Therapy Verbatim. And it's a short book. But what he said is, your mind forms a hierarchy of business and of unfinished businesses. And I don't know, maybe not rich enough, not pretty enough. Who knows how these things vary? But what I suspect is, and this is what Perls suspected, is what happens is your mind forms this unconscious hierarchy. And what will happen is the most important issues will keep pushing their way up in the hierarchy, influencing your conscious decisions. And what was happening with him is I think he was not aware that the reason he was attracted to these women and then getting dissatisfied is they were nice people. I liked his fourth wife, and I liked his fifth wife. Is that he didn't bring it to consciousness. So what Fritz Perls' idea for therapy is, get a dream, don't trust anything else, don't ask them how their day was, how their week was, who their boss is, ask him for a dream. And he loved recurring dreams. And I love Freud too. I mean, the guy was just so open and honest in a way, not with himself necessarily, but he said, Irma, remember his dream of Irma? He says, I've never had one of those, what they call, reoccurring dreams. And then in his interpretation of dreams, he says, okay, I had another dream of Irma. 5 pages later, okay, I dreamt of Irma again. But he didn't consider that a reoccurring dream. Probably because he was semi-happily married in all appearances. And he, it probably bothered him that he was attracted to Irma. And he didn't like, when Irma stopped therapy with him, he didn't like the other doctor. He was really jealous of the other doctor who started therapy with her. So even Freud's own unconscious bothered him. But Fritz Perls would use the therapy to bring the unconscious conscious. And most therapists, don't you think you agree, is make the unconscious conscious. And then you can heal. And then you can start to be complete and whole. That's dream therapy in 45 minutes. Pretty good, huh?
So hierarchy of unmet needs.
Unmet needs. Even if I talk fast, I could get a lot done.
Sorry. This is schedule. I'm dreaming, I guess. Am I audible? Okay. Okay. So that was a wonderfully entertaining and intellectually invigorating talk. Definitely one of the most entertaining academic talks I've ever heard, I must say. So it's very difficult to match that, and I wouldn't even want to. So the way I want to approach this response is, it'll be a series of somewhat different developments on the same theme, sleep and dream. And I'll approach it from 3 hats. The first that of a clinical practitioner, and where I see dream and sleep there, interpretation there. Secondly, what dream could be for literature, what kind of purpose it could serve as literature, in literature, and that's where I'm bringing in my literary hat. And the third would be what is dream and what are the interests as far as sleep and dream are concerned for a philosopher. So the three hats being the hats of the clinician, the hats of the literary scholar, and the hats of the philosopher. Okay, so to begin with the first one, as a clinician, and maybe I'll begin with a small vignette. So one of the, so I practice a kind of psychoanalysis which is called Lacanian Psychoanalysis, which is somewhat different from the Freudian structure, but again there are similarities. Before actually going into the vignette, let me point out a couple of things here. As Freud's famous statement was, dreams are royal roads to the unconscious. And dream is one of the formations of the unconscious for Freud. There's a certain interesting movement that happens with the Freudian or post-Freudian developments made by the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. And one of the important developments is there's a displacement. There's a displacement of dream from that royal position as a formation of the unconscious. So as Lacanians, we are much more interested in slips than dreams. For example, we don't really ask an analysand. Analysand is the term Lacan coined for the patient because he didn't want to use that language. So the analysand is the one who comes into analysis. And if the analysand doesn't speak, there are other strategies, but we do not necessarily bring in this question, oh, did you have a dream? But what is very interesting is that, and here I jump into the vignette, they often come back to a dream which they haven't talked about for a number of sessions, and we get the impression that the dream is really crucial. And there was a reason why the subject, for want of a better word, because analysand is a technical word, let me use the word patient here if you allow me. So the patient, after a few sessions, would actually come back to a dream and say, okay, I had that dream which I wanted to tell you about but did not. And then, there would be a dream narration there. Now, there are things called transference dreams in psychoanalysis. So, for example, the fact that we are in a psychoanalytic relationship, the two of us in the clinic, would generate some dreams. And this is where I'm taking a little bit of a departure from Professor Coolidge's point about dream as a material for generating analysis, as it were. And that's exactly the Freudian point. There is a transference that happens between two people when they are analyzing one another. And I'll be as radical as to say analyzing one another. Because again, that's the import of Lacan's word analysand. Analysand is the analyzer. And in certain ways, the analyst is someone who receives that analysis and tries to reorganize some of the analysis which has been done, in fact, by the analysand as the analyzer. So, so in this dream that my patient didn't want to talk about and didn't mention, after quite a few sessions, he came back to this dream, and there were various things in the dream. There's one particular, so this is a person who has had a severe problem with various kinds of significant others in his childhood. And according to him, this has led to a certain accumulation of anger in him. And it's an anger that he fails to control on various occasions. In this dream, he was talking about himself in a room, and he was, as it were, left alone in that room. And at the same time, he had this feeling that someone was coming for him, perhaps his father, he said. And his father is one of these angry others he has been talking about for a long, long time. And then he didn't quite know what happened. He didn't want his father to come into the room and get angry at him. And then he shifted to another moment. So there was a gap in the dream. And he shifted to another moment where he and his father were talking to one another very nicely as friends. And he associated, so the method that classically in psychoanalysis we use is free association. We don't ask anything. We don't ask for anything. We just ask the person to say whatever he or she wants to say. So, and there is a certain logic of association that we want to trace in whatever the person says. So he went to that back door, the back door outside of which he saw himself and his father talking to each other very amicably after that scene in the room when he was alone and apprehending the entry of his father. And he also told me that that door had associations for him. And he went into those associations and said how that door led to a garden and how he and his brother would often play in that garden and how that would be a relief for them from various anger episodes that he would be witness to. Now, why am I saying all this? Because that word door kept coming back in our analysis again and again after that session when he was talking about that dream. And, you know, it has become one of those very important anchoring words, I think, in our analysis. And mind you, when he uses the word door, he's not always describing a dream. So what I'm talking about is transportation of something from within the dream world, and it goes outside somewhere, but it still stays within the speech of that person, and it keeps coming back. So the word door kept coming back from that dream, from those dream associations. So this is where one formation of the unconscious interacts with other speech formations of the unconscious. Very quickly, what was Lacan's point? Very simply, his point was, let us interpret dream and the scenography of a dream, the scene that we have in a dream, as a language, as a sentence. Let's see what we dream, the scene that we dream of, as a language. And there's a wonderful interpretation of Freud's interpretation of the Irma dream that Lacan does in his initial seminars. Let me make a switch here. I think I'm done with the first hat. Let me go to the second hat, or the literature hat. Okay, so what is dream for literature? What could dream be for literature? So if you catch the drift of whatever I've been trying to say so far, there is already a connection between dream and language, or perhaps even dream as language, a dream language. So in interpretation of dreams, there's a particular metaphor Freud uses, and Lacan goes bonkers on this. The interpretation being, dream is a rebus. Dream is like a rebus. It's a simile that he uses. And again, from that rebus trope, Lacan goes to talk about, you know, things that Fritz Coolidge has already mentioned. Condensation and displacement, the two tropes in dream, as metaphor and metonymy. So this is where we have the famous Lacanian maxim of the unconscious being structured like a language. In this case, we can say the dream is structured like a language. So if we understand dream interpretation, thank you, Aditya, if we understand dream interpretation as a kind of interpretation of language, interpretation of words, interpretation of signifier. Now again, dream allegory is one of those traditions in literature that go back a long way. I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'm going to quickly come to an author who is of great interest to both Freud and Jung. And in fact, that's the thing. And he hates both Freud and Jung. That's James Joyce. And this is a text, Finnegan's Wake, his last full-blown novel, perhaps the most unreadable novel in the world. Finnegan's Wake, in the sense that it's the most difficult novel, perhaps. So this was published in 1939, and Finnegan's Wake became a model for Lacan's later clinic when he was talking about psychosis, the clinic of psychosis. I'll not go into those details, but I wanted to mention literature in the context of psychoanalysis, which is why Finnegan's Wake and James Joyce. Now, this is a particular sentence or a set of sentences where dream is a motive, but what I want to draw your attention to is how dream changes the language. And consciously or programmatically, Joyce did say at various points that Finnegan's Wake is my attempt to come up with a dream language. What is the language of dreams? Can we have a dream language? And there's a language that he invented using more than 39 languages in Finnegan's Wake. And also a language that he invented with different spellings, as you can see, various kinds of alterations which work on pun, homophone, and such structures. Let's read this very slowly and carefully. I wanted to have this on board because without that, visuality doesn't really work. words weigh no more to him than rain drips to Reddenfernham. This is a place near Dublin, which we all like. Rain, when we sleep, drops, but wait until our sleeping, drain, sedops. What he's doing at one level, I would read and argue, is to connect the two formations of the unconscious, dream and slip. First you have words, the weight of words, and then you have an analogy between words and raindrops. And by the way, he uses drips, which is more of a corporeal metaphor, the dripping of the vein, as it were. So words, weight of words, and then raindrops, and then a specific place name, which I won't go into. And then again, an incomplete sentence, which we all like. What do we all like? Perhaps the weight of words, perhaps the way, and also, let's also mark the negation being repeated, the repetition of the no. Words weigh no more to him than rain drips. And then finally, rain when we sleep drops. So words drop, rain drops, and we fall into sleep, underlining the word fall there, which would be my segue to my third category, philosophy. But nevertheless, so words with their weight drop, raindrops drip, and what it does finally is, I think, the effect of these two words. So what does dream do to language? I would say it produces, and here I connect back to what Professor Coolidge was saying in terms of the creative aspect of dreams. So we come back to two words which are generated by the dream, as it were. It's the fall of words in dreams, dream as language, that produces drain, which is in a sense, of course, drain, but also dream plus rain. Dream and rain. Sedops is quite clearly drops and sleep together. So there are these words which are slipped. This is like someone slipping on a word and producing another word. So these two are slips, another formation of the Freudian unconscious produced by dream. So that's where the second hat ends. To quickly go into the third category, philosophy. So what is sleeping and dreaming for a philosopher? What does it mean? Again, it's a very, very vast field, and I'm going to be very selective. There's a 2007 short book, a beautiful short book that Jean-Luc Nancy, the French philosopher, wrote called The Fall of Sleep. And it's a varied meditation on dreaming and sleeping, but I'm trying to think what sleeping and dreaming might mean for a philosopher. So there's a beautifully lyrical meditation on this act of fall, the fall. And again, it's very interesting because that's one of those iconic dreams, recurrent dreams, the dreams of falling into somewhere. The dream, one of the iconic dreams that Freud talks about in the interpretation of dreams. But to come back, so he talks about this idea of falling from attention, falling from consciousness in the first half of the book. But I think the really key thread here is, what is the ontology of a dream? To ask that question in a more grounded language would be, is there an identity? Is there a self in a dream? Is there an I? Is it the I who dreams, or is it another I? Is it someone else who dreams and not me? So that question seems to engage Nancy the most throughout this book. What is the subject of a dream? Who is the subject that dreams? Is it me or is it someone else? And there's a beautiful sort of egalitarian thread in the book where he talks about, in one of the chapters, he talks about the equality of sleep, that sleep equalizes us in a sense. And of course, those Shakespearean echoes are there with Hamlet being quoted or echoed. There's also that beautiful sentence, beautiful line in Shakespeare's sonnet that some of you would recognize, death's second self that seals up all in rest. And that particular alliteration of the S, which again comes back to the question of rhythm, slow wave sleep, REM, and the question of rhythm. There's a chapter where Nancy talks about lullabies and this idea of rhythm. What is the rhythm of sleep? Why do lullabies help us to sleep? Because they settle us into a rhythm, as it were. Rhythm, waves, These are things we can think of in some sort of a conjunction. Finally, towards the end of that book, Nancy also talks about the world that we live in. And what is it to dream? What is it to sleep in that world? Sometimes whether sleeping in that world is very difficult or not. And I remember this wonderful scene in one of Bergman's films where we have a young couple who are planning to have a child. And this is, I think, in the context of the war that this particular scene happens. There are all these bombardments and they cannot sleep. And they talk to one another, lying awake on bed, whether they should have a child, whether they should bring a child into the world. So here we open up another thread, the ethics of sleeping and dreaming. And again, notions of wakefulness that are also ethical. But on the other hand, Nancy also talks about this equality of sleep, sleep as a grand equalizer, as it were. That's what I have. Thank you.